Hey, welcome back to Reddit Cheating Wife, the best channel for cheating stories. Like and subscribe to the channel for cheating stories like this.
My 29M ex-fiancé, 29F, cheated on me 4 years ago. I picked myself up and came back stronger than ever. Part 2. After interviews with many businesses, I was offered a position in the New York office of a prominent private equity fund. After I inquired about working in the London office instead, the managing director got me in contact with his London counterpart. After 2 interviews, I was offered and accepted a position at the London office. I was ecstatic. For those who are not in finance, an investment banker who successfully transitions to private equity is seen as a significant achievement. To mark this success, I organized a little party at my apartment following my first day at the new fund. Owen, Antoine, and his so. Antoine had just made the switch to private equity, and his so worked at the fund I had just joined, as well as another buddy arrived. I invited Alyssa to join us, and she enthusiastically agreed. She was the last to arrive, but when she did, she gave me a kiss and a hug and told me how proud she was of me. I closed my eyes and held her for a second longer, savoring the experience. We gathered around my kitchen's island, chatting, laughing, and having a great time. Jane had just returned home. It was 1 a.m. at the time. She could have had a busy day at work, but had most likely just finished sleeping with AP. We looked at the door to see who had just walked in, but we didn't recognize her presence. Everyone at the table knew precisely what was going on. When Jane returned, Alyssa had her hand over my shoulder but didn't take it off. We simply kept conversing, not allowing Jane's presence to detract from our pleasant sentiments. Jane attempted to seat between me and Alyssa, to say the least, but ended up on my opposite side. We carried on our chat as if Jane wasn't there. I ignored her as well, keeping my body directed towards Alyssa the whole time. Jane seemed to be in a lot of pain, and I could tell. Everyone decided to leave at 2 p.m. to go home and sleep. I unlocked the door and let everyone out before putting on my shoes and following them. Jane, with a worried tone in her voice, inquired as to where I was heading. "I'll be back in a minute," I said, closing the door before she could answer. When I awoke at 8 a.m., Alyssa was still sleeping next to me, so I kissed her on the cheek and went home to carry out the last part of my new plan. I had turned off my phone before going to bed since it was inundated with text messages and phone calls from Jane. Jane was sitting on the island looking sad when I arrived home, her eyes and nose red from weeping. My heart would have crushed for her if this had happened before she betrayed me, and I would have done everything to cheer her up. But after what she'd done, I felt nothing, not even pity. "What were you doing?" she inquired. "I fell asleep in the vehicle," I said. I didn't own a car, but I didn't care if my replies were illegible at the time. Must clean up and go to work. I then entered the shower. I got out and put on my suit, realizing that she needed to be at peace before leaving for work, and she couldn't be at home if my plan was to succeed. I exited the room fully clothed, approached Jane, and softly put my palm on her face. "Look," I said softly, staring into her eyes, "I have to go to work now, but I promise I'll come home earlier today to speak about this, okay?" I then softly kissed her forehead and told her I loved her. That was the only fake sincere kiss I ever gave her, and I was relieved that I wouldn't have to do it again. The last element of my new plan was to move out and ghost her, but instead of going to New York, I would be moving into a new and significantly more luxury flat in an affluent neighborhood in the city center that I had acquired the previous week. I had taken a day off from work to relocate since weekdays were when Jane was gone from home the longest and most consistently. I had breakfast with Owen and Antoine at a neighboring eatery. They too had taken a day to help me out. When we were finished, I checked her position on my phone, and she was indeed at work. We returned to my previous apartment, loaded all of my belongings that I hadn't transferred to Owen's place into his vehicle, and drove away. I was sorry to leave the apartment I had called home for the previous 3 years, but this was a fresh beginning, and change isn't always easy. The former flat's lease was in my name, and it was set to expire in 2 months. But with my new wage, 2 months' rent at the previous place was nothing. Besides, paying 2 months' rent to see my traitorous fiancé's life fall apart was a steal. When I first moved out, everything was amazing. What I was doing was excellent, and I was having a wonderful time. I found myself with a lot more free time than I had anticipated. I was able to go back into boxing on a daily basis and sleep better at night. My friends commented on how I seemed to be happier and healthier, and I agreed. The connection between Alyssa and I was formalized, and we were extremely content in our partnership. She even had the chance to work for a different private equity company straight out of college, which was a significant achievement in and of itself. To be honest, I was happier than I had been since high school graduation, which was a long time ago. I was gone for a week, and Jane took it like an uppercut to the chin from which she would be unable to recover for a long period of time. She chased all of my friends with messages and phone calls, wondering about my whereabouts at one time. I had forbidden her from using my phone, social media, and other electronic devices. She still had the engagement ring I gave her, and asking for it back wouldn't have given me much of a leg up on the competition. I was completely unaware of her link to AP, and I couldn't care less about what happened to them. He had the option of having her if he so desired. Trash is often gathered in a heap. On the ground. My return to my work after a morning meeting was interrupted by an unwanted guest, an agitated Jane, who stood between me and my cubicle and demanded to be let into the building. When she approached me, she screamed and smacked me across the face, with streams of expletives and rage streaming from her mouth as she tried to slap me across the face. I easily avoided her strikes. Chiara, my cubicle mate, and another employee were able to immediately subdue the woman. "I was so worried about you," she wailed as she dropped to her knees. "I've been missing you. Where have you disappeared to? You have my heartfelt admiration." "How could you do such a thing to me?" says the author. I pulled out my phone, played the clip of her and AP getting it on, and threw it in her face without thinking. Today, when I reflect back on that experience, I find myself giggling over her expression of horror on her face. She started to hyperventilate as a result of this. The woman mumbled, her breathing heavy. "Look," she said, "I can explain. It's not what it seems to be." When I saw the timeline, I couldn't stop myself from giggling. It's not what it seems to be at first. The fact that she was being manipulated by someone other than her fiancé was immediately apparent. I wanted to scream at her and smack her in the face for all she'd done to me over the years. In reality, it would come out as me seeking to convince her that she had committed a horrific crime against humanity. She was well aware that she had messed up, and the guilt was already consuming her. Then she murmured gently, "Op, please take a look at me. For as long as the sky is blue, I'll be with you. I love you, and I'll always love you." "In London, the sky is always dismal," says the author. Keeping a straight face and a smug tone on my face, I answered. Chiara smothered a giggle by squeezing her lips together with the palm of her hand. Security intervened and escorted Jane out of the office, where her weeping continued uninterrupted. A little more than an hour later, Jane got yet another dose of karma. I had made plans to meet up with Alyssa for lunch. The moment I walked through the door of my building's lobby, she was waiting for me. We kissed and then walked hand in hand towards the exit, right into Jane's perplexed gaze. We kissed again. During a particularly unpleasant time, we were all gazing at each other. Jane then collapsed on her knees, again, and sobbed uncontrollably. Most likely, she was merely jealous that I'd abandoned her for someone far more attractive, or she may have been filled with guilt and grief. I never find out, and to be honest, I couldn't care less. We just moved around her and out into the open to avoid her. The rest of Jane's story centers on her engagement and her relationships with her friends and family, but that's a story for another day. For the time being, life is still good for me. I was elevated to VP, Vice President, at my fund only a few weeks ago. And I'm on track to become a partner by the time I turn 40, hopefully. As of right now, Alyssa is my new fiancée. I proposed to her last summer, and she accepted with tears in her eyes. We are madly in love with each other. We want to be married as soon as the pandemic is over, and we're already talking about starting a family together. Even though the new lockdown is a dreadful experience for everyone involved, we are very fortunate to have each other to depend on during such trying moments. That brings my story to a close, ladies and gentlemen. For the sake of illustration, if you have been the victim of infidelity, it is not the end of the world. You can always bounce back, level up, and reach new heights you never imagined were possible. Everyone has a beautiful day ahead of them.